Thank you all for coming. As you can see, my name is Kojo Idrissa. Excuse me, I'm your presenter. So what I'm talking about today is building a more inclusive community culture within the Python community. And so I've got some bullet points here about myself. I come from a slightly less traditional background as far as people here at PyTexas or in a lot of programming conferences go. I actually come from an accounting background. I've been a college educator. I read an MBA. Been teaching myself software development and web development. So I'm changing careers, so you can hire me if you'd like to. That's always a nice thing. I've got here that I'm a member of these different communities, the Python Houston community, Python Web, PyLadies, Girls Coding Club, which is in Houston, and TXRX Labs. And I point those out because even though this talk is focusing on the Python community, it's something that is relevant for a wide range of technology-based communities because they have similar issues. So the idea that diversity is useful for problem solving, that's a known thing, and so just Google that exact string. What you see on the screen, I'm like, Google that, and you'll be taken to all sorts of research that demonstrates that more diverse groups are better at problem solving. And so what we look at here is diversity not as some sort of a moral issue, or you trying to, what would Jesus do? That's not what this is about. It's about enhancing performance in the technical groups that you're in, but more specifically within a particular technical culture. So here it's fairly self-serving. How do we make the Python community better? Well, a more diverse community is a community that's better at solving problems, whether it be organizing a conference or enhancing the quality of an open source project or that sort of thing. So that's a known issue. The question, however, is when you look at diversity, it's easy to diversify things. If you look at a group or a culture and you think, oh, well, it's mostly, say, white men. If you want more women, you can go find women. There are affinity groups. You can find women, find people of color. That's not difficult to do, to bring in people from different backgrounds. The trick is, how do you get those people to stay in your community, and how do you actually get them to become contributors to the community? And so that's what we start looking at having an inclusive culture. So diversity just means lots of different types of people. An inclusive culture is one that is welcoming to a wide range of people and causes them to want to stay and be involved and make contributions. And so when you've got an inclusive culture, you get this sort of persistent self-sustaining diversity, which if you've got an inclusive culture, you don't have to worry about how do we make more diversity happen. It just happens on its own because people are exposed to your community, they are welcome, they feel comfortable, they stay and they contribute, and then that sort of cycle perpetuates itself. So then the question becomes, okay, thanks, Kojo. You've told us that this inclusive culture is helpful. It's a good thing. How do we do it? So there are three things that you need to focus on if you're trying to make your culture more inclusive. One, awareness. Two, empathy. And then three, the idea of privilege. And so I'm going to step through each of those quickly, each of which is sort of a big topic. And so I'm going to, based on time limitations, I'm going to have to move through them sort of quickly. But those are the three main points we'll be covering. So the first one is awareness. You need to know what your culture is like. If you don't know what your culture is like currently or what messages your group's culture is sending to people, then it's hard to try to make adjustments. You can't, as we all know, you can't fix something that you haven't measured. You measure things and then you see what's going on. So this thing here, watching for silent errors. You're all familiar with the Zen of Python, and if you are not, then just next time you open a Python interpreter, type import this. You'll get a list of different design decisions made about Python. One of them is that errors should not pass silently. And what happens is when you have a community culture where people are being, people are made to feel uncomfortable, we have a culture that's not inclusive, it's a silent error. People aren't going to just pause and write you a nice letter. They're not going to file a bug report. They're not going to go to your GitHub and, create a new issue. They'll just come, experience your culture, feel uncomfortable about it, and then go away and never return. So you have to be aware of these sorts of things. You have to be sort of vigilant with regard to how people are made to feel when they come into an environment you have, whether it be a conference, whether it be a meetup, whether it be your company culture. So you need people to actually actively be vigilant about what kind of culture you have, and what sort of messages it's sending, and more specifically, what sort of messages are being sent to people who aren't you. And this is sort of a group effort, so this is something that each of us is responsible for. Definitely leaders in communities, but each individual member also responsible for this sort of thing. And so here, as another way to help boost your awareness about what your group culture is like, this idea of flipping the demographics is important. So if you are in an event, and you're a man, and it's a mostly male event, just mentally flip that around. How would you feel if you were one of the few men in an almost all-women event? Or if you're heterosexual, if you were at an event where you were suddenly one of the few heterosexuals and everyone else is not heterosexual, and so on and so forth. So this idea of sort of flipping these demographics is useful from the standpoint of building awareness with regard to what's happening in your culture, how people may feel when they get exposed to it. So if you're not aware of what's happening in your culture, you can't improve it, you can't enhance it. The next step is empathy. And again, you can't have empathy without awareness. This idea of understanding potential attendees. Here I'm talking about things like conferences like this, but also meetup groups, or even in a company setting if you're looking to hire people. So I've had a couple of conversations with people about this just earlier this week and over the past month or so. If you are, so I presented a version of this talk at DjangoCon, which was just about 2 weeks ago. And there's the same issue of trying to bring in a wider audience, trying to bring in a more diverse group of people, that sort of thing. It is an unfortunate reality that tech culture tends to be dominated by and tends to sort of cater towards a younger white male audience. And what that means is people who aren't in that demographic often have negative experiences at these different events, at tech conferences or geek conferences, that sort of thing. And so if you are trying to provide some sort of outreach, you're trying to draw in a wider, more diverse group, your conference or your event probably isn't the first event of that type that they've attended, and they've had some sort of experience at an event like yours. And if it was a negative experience, you now have to deal with that. But one of the best ways to deal with that is to have an understanding of, oh, okay, if you don't want to come to my meetup or to my tech conference, it's not because you think I'm a bad person. It could be because you've been to other similar events and had these negative experiences. And if you've been to 4 tech conferences and at 3 of them you've been harassed in some way or physically assaulted or just been made to feel bad, I'm not so excited about going to the 5th one. So having some sort of understanding of the people that you're trying to bring into your events, as you're trying to make your community more diverse and have a more inclusive culture, having some sort of understanding of the issues that they're dealing with and what their resistances might be is important. Again, this idea of how much would you pay for this bad experience. So even a conference like PyTexas, which is an extraordinary value. I've come to PyTexas, this is what, my 5th one, I think. And it's one of the best values among conferences there is. But even at that extraordinary value, if you're fairly confident that you're not going to have a good time, I mean, it couldn't be, even if it were free and someone like drove to your home in a limousine with champagne and massaged your feet the whole way here, if once you arrive, you think it's going to be terrible, that's still not a good deal. I mean, thank you for the foot massage and the champagne, that was nice, but now I'm going to be stuck here for 2 or 3 days and it's going to be terrible. So again, so just understanding how people are going to feel about your event, or how they may feel, or what sort of history they may have with events like yours. It's very important. So awareness of your own culture, and then some sort of empathy with regard to how other people might react to events, might react to the culture that's represented by your event or the type of event. Those are both very important. This last issue here we look at is privilege. I talked before about limousines and massages and champagne. When people hear the term privilege, what they often think is that sort of thing exactly. Like you're on the chaise lounge, just reclining and having someone feed you grapes and fan you, or someone massaging your feet in a limousine as you're then carried from one penthouse apartment to another penthouse apartment. No, that's not what privilege is. privilege isn't wealth. It's not having things easy. It is the set of things that you don't have to deal with. And so I gave a version of this talk at AlterConf in Austin in April. And so one of the speakers there was this gentleman, Jess Sly, read on Twitter. And this is from a quote from his talk. And I think this sort of reframes privilege in an interesting way because, again, when you hear the talk about privilege, people often think of, well, I'm not privileged. I have to work hard every day. I have, bills to pay. I have issues, blah, blah, blah. I'm not privileged. Well, privilege isn't, you pouring out champagne because it's a day old. It's all these extra things that you don't have to worry about, that you don't have to deal with, but that people who have less privilege do have to worry about. So there are these extra burdens. So understanding this concept is important. And so in an effort to try to make that a little clearer, we've got two things we're looking at here. Privilege profiles, which are some things I'm working on to try to help visualize what does your privilege actually look like? What are the set of things that you don't have to deal with that other people do, or the things that you deal with that other people don't have to do? And also this idea of privilege arbitrage. So privilege arbitrage, again, I'm not an actual social scientist, so it's a term I've made up. It may or may not be 100% scientifically valid. Your mileage may vary. No warranties apply, that sort of thing. But so if you're familiar with financial arbitrage is a situation, again, I'll make an example based on myself from when I lived in China. If you live in China, or a country where the cost of living is lower, but you're getting paid in the currency of another country with a higher cost of living, then those differences provide you some benefit. Here with privilege arbitrage, so that you get personal benefit from that. With privilege arbitrage, this is a situation where people who have different levels of privilege in different areas can use their enhanced privilege to benefit other people in their community who don't have as much privilege in those areas to benefit the community. So this is not about you profiting yourself. This is about you using your privilege or using your privilege differential to benefit the community. So that's all a bunch of words, but nobody cares. What does that actually look like, Kojo? Show us a picture, Mr. Baldman. Ta-da! So I've got these people, 5 people, and for the sake of comparisons, these are all people who work together. These are all people who work together, they're friends, they're all software developers. They all work in the same company. So this is Adam. So we've got different axes here. You got CIS gendered at the top, going counterclockwise. Heterosexuality, male, white, and then educational background, income, and wealth. So I've chosen these axes, and again, I'm not a social scientist, but I can give you my methodology. I've chosen these axes because these are the situations that are generally of the highest privilege in our society, i.e., you have the fewest number of problems. If you're, and not CIS gender, if you're cisgendered, if you're not familiar with that term, cisgendered means that your internal representation, your internal image of your gender matches the body that you were born into. So if you're cisgendered, you don't have any additional problems to deal with. There aren't any issues that you have related to that because that's considered the norm. If you're heterosexual in our society, you don't have any additional issues or problems that are based on that. But again, if you're not cisgendered or if you're not heterosexual, then you might have some additional burdens to deal with. If you're a male, the reality is America is both a sexist and a racist society. So if you're a male, you tend not to have additional burdens to deal with from being a man. You're not dealing with sexism, that sort of thing. If you're white in America, you're not dealing with racism. And so these are the points of highest privilege. The other 3, educational background, income, and wealth. For the purposes of this, I've left these equal across all the different examples, just so we can sort of see comparison points. So I've got a 10-point scale here. Income level is 7 for all these people, so they're all, not too bad off income. Family wealth is 3 because in America, people tend not to save a lot of money. And then educational background is 5. They've all got bachelor's degrees. So this is Adam. This is his privilege profile. This is Adam's coworker, Eve, who has a bachelor's degree in CS just like Adam. They all went to the same school. They all work at the same place. But we notice Eve's privilege profile vastly different because she's not male. And so there's like this big hole there for Eve. Eve, cisgendered, white, heterosexual, female. Frank, their other coworker, cisgendered, heterosexual, African-American male. So if you notice there on the y-axis, he's got a little bit of a score there. He's got a score of 1 because he's African-American, but he's sort of light-skinned, which actually is useful. Actually does provide some benefit. It reduces some of the problems he has to face. Then we have George, who is a cisgendered homosexual African-American male. So there are some, as you see, some gaps in his privilege. And then we have Shelley, who is another coworker, who is a transgendered female who is white. And so you notice huge gaps in her privilege from not being male, not being heterosexual, and not being cisgendered. So how does this actually work in practice? How do you actually do this privilege arbitrage? One, you fill in the gaps for others when and where you can, and then you make it clear that your community doesn't tolerate nonsense with regard to these issues. So if we go back, we can see that, there we go. So we see Eve's got gaps here that can be filled in by Adam and by Frank, whereas Frank has gaps that can be filled in by Eve and by Adam, and George has gaps that can be filled in by different people. So it's a matter of different people making use of their enhanced privilege to benefit other members of the community who don't have as much privilege in those areas. But again, you can't do that if you, A, don't have awareness of what your community culture is like, and B, don't have empathy for other people in the community or for potential attendees of your community. So that is my talk. If you want to, and I know there's a lot here, and so if you want to catch up with me on the internet, I am Transition on Twitter, and there's my website where my very bare bones blog is. My slides are available here at the speaker deck link. And I think we've got a minute or so left for questions, and so if anyone wants to ask any questions, I'm open, or you can find me here during the rest of the day or catch up with me on the internet. Any questions? Yes? No? Oh, yes? Okay, so practical example of privilege arbitrage. This group of people that I've mentioned, we're all somewhere at a function, and somebody makes a joke about how women can't do that, or women aren't good at that. So Eve is like, well, that's not cool, and it's not. But this is a situation where Adam or Frank or George needs to sort of step in and be like, no, that's not acceptable. Instead of Eve having to deal with that just by herself, one of the other men in the group needs to act as an ally for her, and also reinforce the idea that this isn't a value this isn't behavior that's accepted in our community. This isn't a value that's supported by our community, instead of Eve having to deal with it just herself. Anything else? If not, thank you for your time.